In the pouring rain, a single dad dives in front of a speeding car. Brakes, scream. The CEO steps out, then she screams too, because he isn't attacking. He's shielding a little girl under a broken streetlight. At the hospital, the truth hits. This quiet dad isn't just a hero, he runs a tiny center where kids find safety, homework, help, and hope. But there's a shock she never saw coming. Her own company is set to tear that center down. Now the bosses want profit. The dad wants a future for the kids. And the CEO must choose. Keep her power or save their home. Photos leak. Pressure builds. A town holds its breath as one brave father and one powerful woman collide. When faith, power, and a child's safety are on the line, what will she risk to save what he jumped to protect? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The windshield wipers swept back and forth, fighting against the heavy autumn rain. Inside Victoria's luxury car, the leather seats creaked as Daniel shifted, wincing and holding his injured shoulder. Lila pressed close to her father's side, her small hands clutching his worn jacket. "Daddy, you're hurt," Lila whispered, her dark eyes wide with worry. Water dripped from her braids onto her purple backpack. "I'm okay, sweetheart," Daniel assured her, though his face was tight with pain. "Just a bump." Victoria glanced in the rearview mirror, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Her perfectly styled hair was coming undone, and mascara smudged beneath her eyes from the rain. "I'm so sorry," she said, for what must have been the 10th time. "I didn't see, I never meant to." "It wasn't your fault, ma'am," Daniel said quietly. "That corner's always dark. The streetlight's been broken for months. Still, I should have been more careful." Victoria's voice shook slightly. She wasn't used to feeling this rattled, this out of control. In the boardroom, she always knew exactly what to do. But here, with a bleeding man and his frightened daughter in her back seat, she felt completely lost. The small boy Daniel had saved Tommy from the center's after-school program had been picked up by his mother, who'd come running when she heard the screech of brakes. Now it was just the three of them in the car, with only the sound of rain and Daniel's controlled breathing breaking the tense silence. "You're like a superhero, Daddy," Lila said suddenly, her voice full of pride despite her worry. "You saved Tommy just like that time you saved Mrs. Peterson's cat from the tree." A ghost of a smile crossed Daniel's face. "Just trying to help, baby girl. That's what we do, right?" "Right," Lila nodded emphatically. "Like you always say, everyone matters." Victoria caught Daniel's eye in the mirror again, struck by the quiet dignity in his expression despite his obvious pain. There was something about him that didn't fit with her preconceptions of a janitor, a depth of character that made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite explain. The emergency room lights cast harsh shadows as they pulled up to the entrance. Victoria jumped out first, her designer heels splashing in puddles as she hurried to help Daniel from the car. He tried to wave her off, but stumbled slightly as he stood. "Please," Victoria said, surprising herself with how gentle her voice sounded. "Let me help." Inside, the fluorescent lights highlighted the pallor of Daniel's face and the growing bloodstain on his shirt where he'd hit the pavement. The waiting room was crowded with other rain-soaked patients, but Victoria marched straight to the desk, her CEO authority automatically kicking in. "This man needs immediate attention," she announced to the tired-looking nurse. "He was hit by a car. We'll need his insurance information," the nurse began, but Daniel was already shaking his head. "Ma'am, I appreciate the help, but I can wait my turn. My insurance." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Victoria felt something twist in her chest. This man had thrown himself in front of her car to save a child, and now he was worried about insurance? She pulled out her phone, already dialing her personal assistant. "James? I need you to contact the hospital's administration." "Yes, right now. Everything for Mr. Daniel." She paused, looking at him questioningly. "Carter," Lila supplied helpfully. "Daniel Carter. And I'm Lila, Mr. Daniel Carter," Victoria continued, turning away slightly. "Everything will be covered by Hale Industries. Yes, full coverage. Make it happen." When she turned back, Daniel was looking at her with an unreadable expression. "Miss Hale, you don't have to." "Please," she cut him off. It's the least I can do. A new nurse appeared with a wheelchair, which Daniel reluctantly accepted after Lila gave him a stern look that was so maternal it almost made Victoria smile. As they wheeled him toward an examination room, Lila trotting alongside and chattering about how brave he was, Victoria heard one of the ER nurses mention something that made her pause. "Isn't that the guy who runs the tutoring program at the community center? My sister's kids go there." "Yeah, that's him," another nurse replied. "Such a good man. Spends all his free time helping those kids, doesn't charge a dime. Heard he's a veteran too." Victoria felt the twist in her chest again, stronger this time. The community center. She knew exactly which one they meant, the old building on Oak Street that her company had recently acquired, the one her board was planning to demolish for their new development project. The same community center where Daniel Carter, the man who'd just saved a child at the risk of his own life, apparently spent his evenings helping children for free after working all day as a janitor. "Miss Hale?" Lila's voice pulled her from her thoughts. The little girl stood before her, dark eyes serious. "Are you coming? Daddy wanted to thank you properly, even though I told him you're the one who should be saying sorry." Victoria found herself following Lila down the hallway, her usual confident stride faltering slightly. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely uncertain about what she would say when she entered that examination room. She had no way of knowing that this moment following a child's simple invitation would be the first step toward changing not just her life, but the lives of an entire community. The emergency room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Daniel's face as he sat on the examination table. His soaked jacket hung over a nearby chair, water still dripping onto the linoleum floor. Lila hadn't let go of his hand since they arrived, her eyes wide with worry. "Really? It's not that bad," Daniel said, trying to smile through the pain. "Just a bruise, probably." "Sir, we need to take some x-rays," the doctor said, glancing at his clipboard. "From what you've described about the impact, there could be serious damage to your shoulder." Daniel's shoulders tensed. "X-rays? I don't know if my insurance." He trailed off, conscious of Victoria standing near the door, her designer outfit looking out of place in the stark hospital room. "Daddy, please let them help you," Lila pleaded, squeezing his hand tighter. Her braids were still damp from the rain, and her school uniform was wrinkled. The doctor's expression softened. "We should at least check for fractures. Better safe than sorry." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, doing mental calculations. "Just the basic x-ray, then. Nothing fancy." Victoria stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor. "Mr. Carter? I insist on full treatment. This happened because of my car." "Miss Hale," Daniel interrupted firmly but politely. "You're not responsible. I chose to jump in front of that car. I appreciate the ride here, but I can handle this." Nurse Carla Jennings bustled into the room, bringing warmth with her presence. "Daniel Carter? I thought that was you." Her friendly face broke into a wide smile. "Haven't seen you since you brought those books to the pediatric ward last month?" Daniel's expression brightened slightly. "Hi, Carla. How are those kids doing with their reading?" "Oh, they love those stories you picked out." Carla turned to Victoria, who was watching the exchange with curiosity. "This man is a saint, I tell you. Runs the tutoring program at the community center after working all day as a janitor. Those kids adore him." Victoria's perfectly manicured eyebrows rose. "Tutoring program? 3 nights a week, plus weekends," Carla continued, checking Daniel's vital signs. "Math, reading, music, whatever the kids need help with. Most of them can't afford private tutoring, so Daniel volunteers his time." "It's nothing special," Daniel mumbled, wincing as Carla examined his shoulder. "Just trying to give them a fair shot." The X-ray results confirmed what the doctor suspected, a hairline fracture in Daniel's shoulder. As the doctor explained the treatment plan, Daniel's face grew increasingly concerned. "Physical therapy? A sling for how long?" He shook his head. "Doctor, I need to work. I have bills. And Lila." "Everything will be covered," Victoria said suddenly, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I've already spoken to the billing department." "Ms. Hale, no," Daniel protested. "I can't accept." "You can. and you will." Victoria's tone left no room for argument. "Consider it compensation for saving that child's life." Before Daniel could object further, she strode out of the room to handle the paperwork. Nurse Carla gave him a knowing smile as she adjusted his sling. Hours later, in the waiting room, the adrenaline had worn off. Lila curled up on her father's lap, finally giving in to exhaustion. Her small hand still gripped his shirt, as if afraid he might disappear. Victoria returned from the billing department to find them there. She paused, struck by the scene before her. Daniel's good arm cradled his daughter protectively, even in sleep. His face, usually guarded, had softened as he watched Lila dream. Despite his injured shoulder, his worn clothes, and the late hour, there was a quiet dignity about him that Victoria had rarely encountered in her world of corporate power plays and billion-dollar deals. Something stirred in her chest, an unfamiliar feeling she couldn't quite name. She stood there, watching father and daughter, remembering how he'd thrown himself in front of her car without hesitation to save a child. Not for recognition or reward, but because it was the right thing to do. The same way he apparently spent his evenings tutoring children who couldn't afford help, asking nothing in return. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. But Daniel didn't move, didn't disturb his sleeping daughter. He just held her, humming softly, in a world that suddenly seemed very far from profit margins and board meetings. The hospital cafeteria was nearly empty at this early hour, its white walls tinged orange by the rising sun streaming through large windows. Daniel Carter sat at a corner table, his injured shoulder wrapped in a temporary sling, struggling to fill out insurance forms with his good hand. His pen scratched awkwardly across the paper as he squinted at the small print. Victoria Hale approached with 2 paper cups of coffee, her high heels clicking against the floor. She'd removed her suit jacket, and her silk blouse showed wrinkles from the long night. Despite her disheveled appearance, she still carried herself with the same commanding presence. "Here," she said, setting 1 cup in front of Daniel. "Hospital coffee isn't exactly gourmet, but it's better than nothing." "Thank you." Daniel's voice was soft but genuine. He wrapped his fingers around the warm cup, taking a careful sip. Victoria settled into the chair across from him, studying his face. The question that had been nagging at her all night finally spilled out. "Why did you do it? Jump in front of my car to save that child? He wasn't even yours." Daniel looked up from his paperwork, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Because someone has to." "That's not an answer," Victoria pressed, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "You could have been killed. You have your own daughter to think about." "Every child at that center is someone's daughter or son," Daniel replied, "and not all of them have someone looking out for them. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to step up." Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the table. "I was raised to believe that kind of thinking is naive. My father always said you have to look out for yourself first." "Sounds lonely," Daniel observed quietly. Victoria's shoulders stiffened, but something in Daniel's tone made her continue. "It was. Private schools, tutors, business lessons instead of playdates." Father said showing emotion was weakness. Mother agreed. "They were grooming me to take over the company from day one." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Different kind of pressure than what I faced, but pressure all the same." "What about you?" Victoria asked, surprising herself with her curiosity. "How did you end up raising Lila alone?" Daniel's gaze drifted to where Lila slept, curled up in a waiting room chair visible through the cafeteria doorway. "Cancer. Marie fought hard, but..." He swallowed hard. "Lila was only 4. Since then it's been just us. I work as a janitor during the day, tutor at the center evenings. We make it work." "2 jobs, plus raising a daughter?" Victoria couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "You do what you have to," Daniel said simply. "The center helps. They let Lila stay there after school while I finish my shift. The other kids look out for her too. We're all family there, in our own way." A small voice interrupted their conversation. "Daddy?" They turned to see Lila standing in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She padded over to their table in her scuffed sneakers. "Hey, sweetheart," Daniel said warmly. "How are you feeling?" Instead of answering, Lila turned to Victoria. "Thank you for saving my daddy, nice lady." Victoria felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. You're welcome. But your daddy saved someone else first. He's very brave. I know, Lila said matter-of-factly. He's always helping people. That's why God gave him extra strong arms for hugs. She demonstrated by wrapping her arms around Daniel's waist, careful of his injured shoulder. Victoria watched them, something stirring in her chest that she couldn't quite name. The simple affection between father and daughter made her coffee suddenly taste bitter. An hour later, Daniel stood in the hospital lobby, forms finally completed. He adjusted his sling with a wince, then reached for Lila's hand. Well, we should get going. Thank you again for everything, Ms. Hale. You're walking? Victoria asked, noticing his grimace of pain. In your condition? Bus doesn't run this early, Daniel explained. It's not too far. Victoria found herself speaking before she could stop to analyze why. Don't be ridiculous. I'll drive you. That's not necessary. Daniel started to protest. Please? Lila looked up at him with hopeful eyes. My feet are tired, Daddy. Daniel's resistance softened as he looked at his daughter. If you're sure it's not too much trouble, Miss Hale. Victoria. She corrected automatically. And no, it's no trouble at all. She led them toward the parking lot, wondering when she'd last offered anyone a ride, or when someone had last looked at her with such genuine gratitude. Victoria's sleek black car pulled up to the curb outside an aging brick building. The West Side Community Center's faded sign hung slightly crooked above double doors that had seen better days. Rain still dripped from the building's worn gutters. This is it, Daniel said softly from the passenger seat. Not much to look at, but he trailed off, his good arm, gesturing vaguely. Lila bounced in the back seat. Come inside, please. I want to show you my art from Miss Jenny's class. Victoria hesitated, glancing at her expensive watch. But something in Daniel's tired eyes and his daughter's hopeful face made her nod. Just for a moment. They walked through the heavy doors into a hallway lined with children's artwork. The walls needed fresh paint, and some of the fluorescent lights flickered, but colorful paper chains and inspirational posters brightened the space. The sound of children's laughter echoed from various rooms. Sorry about the mess, Daniel said, leading them past a stack of donated books waiting to be sorted. We make do with what we have. A group of kids burst out of a classroom, backpacks bouncing. They stopped short when they saw Daniel. Mr. Carter, several voices called out at once. Then they noticed his sling, and their faces fell. I'm okay, he assured them quickly. Just a little scratch. Everyone, this is my friend Victoria. She helped me get to the hospital last night. The children clustered around Victoria, their earlier shyness forgotten. A small girl with braids tugged at Victoria's sleeve. Are you a doctor? You look like a doctor in those fancy clothes. Victoria smoothed her wrinkled silk blouse self-consciously. No, I'm not a doctor. She paused, suddenly reluctant to mention her CEO title. I'm just visiting. Come see our computer lab. A boy around 12 grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a room down the hall. Victoria found herself swept along by their enthusiasm. The computer lab was a small room with 6 ancient desktop computers lined against one wall. The monitors were bulky and outdated, and several chairs had been patched with duct tape. Yet the room buzzed with energy as kids took turns practicing typing and working on basic coding exercises. Tommy here is our resident tech genius, Daniel said, resting his good hand on the shoulder of a serious-looking teenager who was helping younger students. He's teaching himself programming from YouTube videos. Victoria watched Tommy patiently explain basic HTML to 2 younger children. Her trained eye noticed the peeling paint, the worn carpet, the makeshift repairs everywhere. But she also saw something else. Determination in their faces, pride in their accomplishments, joy in learning despite the limitations. They moved through other rooms, a small library with mismatched shelves, an art room where paper flowers hung from the ceiling, a music corner where a donated piano sat slightly out of tune but well loved. In each space, children greeted Daniel with obvious affection. They showed him artwork, asked about his injury, offered to carry things for him. He knew each child by name, asked about their families, praised their efforts. "Marcus, how did that science test go?" he called to one boy. "Did those flashcards help?" "Got a B+, Marcus beamed. "My mom put it on the fridge." They ended up in what seemed to be the main study area, where tables of various sizes hosted homework sessions and tutoring. A girl with thick glasses was explaining fractions to younger students using pieces of paper. Two boys shared a tattered social studies textbook, taking notes. Victoria watched as Daniel eased himself into a chair beside a small boy who was frowning at a math worksheet. The child's shoulders were slumped in defeat. "Having trouble with those word problems, James?" Daniel asked gently. James nodded, pushing the paper away. "I'm stupid at math." "Hey now, none of that talk," Daniel said firmly but kindly. "You're not stupid at anything. Sometimes we just need to look at problems differently." He pulled the worksheet closer. "Let's read this one together. If Sarah has 36 cookies and wants to share them equally with her friends." Victoria stood back, observing as Daniel broke down the problem into smaller pieces. He used simple examples, drew quick pictures, praised each step of understanding. Gradually, James's frown softened into concentration. "So if she has 6 friends, and we divide 36 by 6. James worked it out slowly on his paper. His face lit up. "Each friend gets 6 cookies. Perfect." Daniel high-fived him with his good hand. "See, you can do this. Try the next one on your own, and I'll check it." As James bent over his paper with new confidence, Victoria felt an unfamiliar sensation on her face. She touched her cheek, surprised to realize she was smiling. Not her practiced business smile or her camera-ready public smile, but something real and unconscious that had crept up without her permission. The room hummed with quiet purpose. Children helping children. Volunteers moving between tables. Small victories celebrated with whispered excitement. Afternoon light slanted through the windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. Despite the building's obvious poverty, the space felt alive with possibility. Victoria watched Daniel lean over to check James's work, his face glowing with pride at the boy's progress. Her smile grew wider, and for once she didn't try to control it. The evening settled over the small apartment complex like a worn blanket. Inside Unit 4B, Daniel stirred a pot of vegetable soup one-handed, his injured shoulder making even simple tasks a challenge. The kitchen was tiny but clean, with mismatched chairs around a second-hand table where Lila sat doing her homework. "Need help, Daddy?" Lila asked, looking up from her math worksheet. "I've got it, sweetheart." "How's that multiplication coming along?" "It's okay. 7 times 8 is giving me trouble, though." Daniel was about to answer when a knock at the door made them both turn. He wasn't expecting anyone, and neighbors rarely visited. Lila jumped up to peek through the peephole. "Daddy, it's Miss Victoria." Daniel's eyebrows rose in surprise. He opened the door to find Victoria Hale standing there, looking somewhat out of place in her designer suit, holding several bags of groceries. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, shifting uncomfortably. "I was driving by and thought, well, these are for the center." She held up the bags. "I noticed the kitchen there could use some supplies." "That's very thoughtful," Daniel said, stepping back to let her in. "We were just about to have dinner. Would you like to join us? It's nothing fancy, just soup and bread." Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you. I'd like that." Lila bounced excitedly. "I'll get another bowl." She scurried to the cabinet, carefully selecting their least chipped bowl. The apartment's modest furnishings stood in stark contrast to Victoria's elegant appearance. Family photos lined the walls, and a small bookshelf overflowed with well-loved volumes. A teddy bear with a patch on its arm sat in the corner of the worn but clean sofa. "Please, sit." Daniel gestured to the table while he checked the soup. "Lila, why don't you show Miss Victoria your art project while I serve dinner?" Lila proudly retrieved a colorful drawing from her backpack. "We made these in Miss Jenny's class at the center. See? It's our whole community holding hands." Victoria studied the crayon drawing, noting how Lila had included people of different colors and sizes, all connected in a circle around what appeared to be the community center building. "It's beautiful," Victoria said softly, touching the paper gently. "You're quite talented." Daniel set bowls of steaming soup on the table, along with sliced bread. "The art programs at the center really help the kids express themselves," he said, easing himself into a chair. "Most of them don't have access to art supplies at home." They began eating, and Victoria found herself surprised by how good the simple meal tasted. The warmth of the kitchen and the easy conversation between father and daughter created an atmosphere she hadn't experienced since childhood. "The center's been a blessing," Daniel continued, helping Lila butter her bread. "Especially since last year, when Hale Industries bought the property. We've been trying to make the most of whatever time we have left." Victoria's spoon clattered against her bowl. "What did you say?" "Oh, about Hale Industries? Yeah. Your company bought the whole block last year. We're expecting the eviction notice any day now." Daniel's voice was resigned but not bitter. "The kids know it's coming, but they still show up every day, hoping for a miracle." Victoria sat very still, her soup forgotten. This is the West Side Development property?" "That's right." Daniel nodded, misreading her shock as simple recognition. "Lot 247. According to the paperwork, the plan is for luxury condos, I hear. Progress, they call it." Lila looked up from her soup. "But where will we go for our classes? And what about Ms. Rose's reading circle? And the Christmas pageant?" "We'll figure something out, baby," Daniel assured her, though his eyes showed uncertainty. "We always do." Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. This was the property she had personally marked for priority development just last month. The demolition plans sat on her tablet in her car right now, waiting for her final approval. She had never connected the dots between the address on paper and this vibrant, vital place she'd discovered today. "The community tried to fight it," Daniel continued, unaware of Victoria's internal struggle. "But big companies usually win these things. We're just grateful for whatever time we have left. Daddy says we should always be thankful for what we have," Lila added, dunking her bread in her soup. "Even when things change." Victoria managed a weak smile, though her chest felt tight. That's very wise." After dinner, Victoria made her excuses and headed to her car, declining Daniel's offer to help carry the groceries in. She sat behind the wheel for several long moments before pulling out her tablet with shaking hands. There they were, the demolition plans for the West Side Development Project. Clean, professional renderings showed gleaming modern buildings where the community center now stood. The projected profit margins were impressive, highlighted in green. The document waited for her electronic signature, which would set the whole process in motion. Victoria stared at the screen, seeing not the profitable future her company had planned, but Lila's crayon drawing of joined hands. She saw Daniel tutoring children despite his own exhaustion, creating a safe haven in a world that offered few such spaces. She saw herself suddenly cast in the role of both savior and destroyer in their story. Her hand trembled as she held it over the tablet screen, the reality of her position hitting her with full force. She was both the person who had helped them today and the one who held the power to destroy their world tomorrow. The weight of that contradiction pressed down on her chest until she could hardly breathe. Through her car window, she could see the light still on in Daniel's apartment. A shadow moved past, probably Lila getting ready for bed. In that moment, Victoria felt the vast distance between the world she inhabited and the one she had glimpsed tonight over soup and bread. She sat there, paralyzed by the magnitude of her choices, as evening deepened into night and the tablet screen grew dim. The morning sun filtered through the community center's dusty windows as Victoria Hale stepped inside, trading her usual designer heels for more practical flats. She deliberately dressed down in a simple blouse and slacks, but still felt overdressed compared to the worn furniture and peeling paint around her. Daniel looked up from where he sat, cross-legged, on a faded reading circle rug, surrounded by young children clutching well-loved books. His shoulder was in a sling, but his smile remained warm and welcoming. "Good morning, Miss Hale. Kids, let's welcome our visitor." A chorus of "good morning" rang out from the children, their faces bright with curiosity. Victoria found herself waving awkwardly, unused to such genuine enthusiasm. "We're just starting our morning reading circle," Daniel explained. "Would you like to join us?" Victoria hesitated, then carefully lowered herself onto the carpet. A small girl with braids scooted closer, offering to share her book. The story was simple, something about a determined train, but Victoria found herself drawn into Daniel's animated reading style. He gave each character a different voice, asked engaging questions, and praised every attempt at sounding out difficult words. "Remember," he told a struggling reader gently, "every great reader started exactly where you are now." The morning flowed into afternoon. Victoria watched as Daniel moved from reading to basic computer skills, teaching older kids the fundamentals of coding on outdated machines that wheezed and hummed. Despite the equipment's limitations, the children's excitement was contagious as they created simple programs. "Look what I made," a boy named Marcus called out, showing Victoria his screen where colorful shapes danced in a pattern. "Mr. Carter taught us loops today." During lunch break, Lila appeared at Victoria's elbow, practically bouncing with excitement. "Want to meet my friends? They've been asking about you." Before Victoria could respond, Lila was pulling her toward a group of children sharing sandwiches and fruit. "This is Jenny and Miguel and Sophia," Lila announced proudly. "And this is Ms. Victoria. She helped my dad when he got hurt." The children peppered her with questions about her car, her job, and whether she knew any famous people. Victoria found herself laughing more freely than she had in years, especially when Miguel solemnly offered to share his cookies with her. In the afternoon, the center filled with music. Some children practiced on donated instruments while others sang in a small choir. Daniel moved between groups, offering encouragement and gentle corrections. Victoria noticed how even the shyest kids seemed to bloom under his attention. "He taught me to play piano," Lila confided, sitting beside Victoria on a worn bench. "Mom used to play, and after she died, she trailed off, then brightened. Now I can play her favorite hymns." A small boy named Tommy approached them, clutching a piece of construction paper. He hesitated, then thrust it toward Victoria. "I made this for Mr. Carter," he explained. "Could you give it to him? I'm too shy." Victoria carefully opened the card. Crayon drawings decorated the borders, and in wobbly letters it read, "Thank you, Mr. Carter, who helps us when no one else will." Something caught in Victoria's throat. She looked around the room with new eyes, seeing beyond the shabby surfaces to the vital heart of the place. Children who might otherwise be alone on the streets were safe here, learning, growing, dreaming of bigger futures. Her phone buzzed with messages from the board about demolition schedules and profit projections. The numbers that had once seemed so important now felt hollow against the reality of what this place meant to these children. As the day wound down and parents began arriving, Victoria helped Daniel stack chairs and tidy up. She watched him say goodbye to each child by name, reminding one about an upcoming test, praising another's artwork, ensuring everyone had a safe ride home. Finally, they stood in the cool night air outside the center. Stars were just beginning to appear above the city's glow. Victoria hugged her arms against the chill, looking at the old building's familiar facade with unfamiliar emotions. "I never realized how much this place matters," she admitted quietly to Daniel. Over the next week, Victoria's sleek black car became a familiar sight outside the community center. Each afternoon, she would arrive carrying bags of supplies, fresh notebooks, pencils, healthy snacks, and whatever else she noticed the center needed. The children no longer stared at her like some foreign creature in fancy clothes. Now they rushed to help her carry things inside, chattering about their days. "Ms. Victoria, look what I drew in art class." A little boy named Marcus held up a crayon drawing of what looked like a rainbow-colored dog. "That's wonderful, Marcus." Victoria found herself genuinely smiling as she set down bags of oranges and granola bars. She'd noticed many of the children came hungry after school. Daniel emerged from the computer room, where he'd been helping teenagers with their homework. His injured arm remained in a sling, but he moved more easily now. "You really don't have to keep bringing things," he said softly. "I want to," Victoria replied, surprising herself with how much she meant it. She watched as children gathered around the snack table, their faces lighting up at the fresh fruit. They deserve good things. As the days passed, Victoria found herself staying later and later. She discovered she had a knack for math tutoring, and several of the older students began seeking her help with algebra. But it was the quiet moments that affected her most deeply, sitting with the younger ones during story time, helping tiny fingers trace letters, celebrating when someone finally understood a difficult concept. One evening, after most of the children had gone home, Victoria and Daniel sat together in the small kitchen. Steam rose from their coffee cups as thunder rumbled outside, the same kind of weather as the night of the accident. But now it felt cozy rather than threatening. "Why did you start all this?" Victoria asked, gesturing to the center around them. "It must be exhausting, especially on top of your regular job." Daniel was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "After Marie, my wife, passed, I was lost. Angry at God, angry at the world. But Lila needed me to be strong." He smiled faintly. "The center gave me purpose again. These kids, they remind me there's still good to be done, still hope to be found." "Faith must help," Victoria observed, trying to keep the skepticism from her voice. "It does. But faith without action is hollow." Daniel looked at her directly. "What about you? No family waiting at home?" Victoria laughed, but it came out brittle. "The board of directors is the closest thing I have to family. I always thought success would be enough. Corner office, company car, power suits." She shook her head. "Funny how empty it all feels now." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of piano music floating in from the main room. They found Lila sitting at the old upright piano, picking out a melody with careful fingers. "It's for the talent showcase," she explained when she saw them. "But I keep messing up this part." Victoria moved closer, drawn by the familiar tune. "Is that Amazing Grace?" Lila nodded. "It was Mama's favorite. Daddy says she used to sing it all the time." Victoria saw Daniel's expression soften with memory and grief. Without thinking, she sat beside Lila on the piano bench. "I took lessons for years as a girl. Would you like some help?" Lila's face lit up. "Really?" For the next hour, Victoria guided Lila through the song, showing her proper finger placement and timing. She hadn't touched a piano in years, but the muscle memory remained. As they played together, other children drifted in, drawn by the music. "Can we sing too?" someone asked. Soon the room filled with young voices, some on key, some decidedly not, but all enthusiastic. Victoria continued playing as Daniel taught them the verses. She glanced up to find him watching her, with an expression she couldn't quite read, gratitude mixed with something deeper. The children's voices rose and fell, sweet and pure. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." Victoria felt warmth spread through her chest, unfamiliar but welcome. Here, surrounded by children's voices and Daniel's gentle leadership, she didn't feel like the tough CEO or the lonely woman in the corner office. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt like she belonged. As the song ended, a small hand slipped into hers. Lila beamed up at her. "That was beautiful, Miss Victoria. Will you help me practice again tomorrow?" "Of course," Victoria answered, surprised by the tears pricking at her eyes. Around her, children chattered excitedly about the upcoming showcase, making plans and suggesting songs. Daniel moved among them, offering encouragement and gentle guidance. Victoria remained at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The normal emptiness of her evenings seemed unbearable now. Here, in this worn-down building with its mismatched furniture and peeling paint, she had found something she never knew she was missing: the feeling of being part of something bigger than herself, something that felt remarkably like family. The community center's old hall buzzed with excitement as families filed in for the annual showcase. Mismatched folding chairs creaked under the weight of parents, neighbors, and community members. Someone had strung twinkling lights across the walls, making the peeling paint less noticeable. Hand-drawn posters decorated every available space, advertising the night's performances with childish enthusiasm. Daniel stood at the front of the room, adjusting the ancient microphone stand. His shoulder was still wrapped in a bandage, but he moved with determination, making sure everything was perfect for his kids. He wore his best shirt, freshly pressed despite its worn collar, and his warm smile lit up the room. Victoria sat in the front row, looking distinctly out of place in her designer outfit. Yet there was nothing stiff or corporate about her tonight. She helped little ones find their seats and complimented nervous performers on their costumes. A week ago, she would have felt awkward in this humble setting. Now it felt more real than any boardroom. "Welcome everyone," Daniel's voice carried through the crackling speakers. "Tonight is special because it's not about what we don't have, it's about celebrating what we do have: talent, heart, and most importantly, each other." The first few acts brought laughter and applause. Kindergartners performing a wobbly dance routine, middle schoolers showing off their science projects, and a group of boys performing a rap about staying in school. Daniel introduced each one with genuine pride, sharing little stories about their progress that made parents beam. When it was time for Lila's performance, Daniel's voice softened with emotion. "Next up is my daughter Lila, singing Amazing Grace, her mother's favorite hymn." Lila stepped onto the makeshift stage in a simple blue dress, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Victoria noticed how she looked exactly like the photo of her mother that sat on Daniel's desk, the same gentle eyes and determined set of her chin. The room fell silent as Lila's clear voice filled the space. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me." Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes unexpectedly. The pure, honest voice stripped away years of corporate armor. She remembered being Lila's age, singing in her school choir before her parents decided music was a waste of time, before spreadsheets and profit margins became her whole world. Around her, other audience members dabbed at their eyes. Daniel stood at the side of the stage, love and loss mingled on his face as he watched his daughter sing. The hymn's message of redemption and hope echoed through the old hall, making everyone forget its shabby condition. Lila's voice grew stronger with each verse. "Through many dangers, toils and snares, I have already come." Victoria noticed movement near the back of the room. A few people were holding up phones, taking pictures. She recognized one as a local reporter, probably drawn by the unusual sight of a CEO at a community center event. But for once, she didn't care about her public image or what the board would think. When Lila finished, the applause was deafening. She curtsied shyly and ran straight to her father, who scooped her up in a one-armed hug, mindful of his injured shoulder. Victoria found herself standing and clapping with everyone else, her cheeks wet with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. The rest of the showcase passed in a blur of proud performances. Victoria sat with Daniel and Lila, helping to hand out certificates and cookies afterward. She didn't notice the camera flashes capturing their natural interactions, their shared laughter as a young magician's trick went comically wrong, the way she helped Lila arrange refreshments, how Daniel's hand briefly touched her shoulder in thanks. As the families began to leave, the hall grew quiet. Empty chairs waited to be stacked, and crumbs littered the floor, but there was a lingering warmth in the air. Victoria watched Daniel thank the last few parents, his tired eyes still bright with joy from the evening's success. When they were finally alone, Victoria spoke softly but firmly. "I'm going to stop the demolition, Daniel. Whatever it takes." He turned to face her, hope flickering across his features. In the dim light of the hall, she could see every line of exhaustion, every mark of struggle on his face. But his eyes held something stronger than weariness: faith. "Thank you," he said simply. But those two words carried the weight of all the lives that depended on this place. Victoria nodded, her decision crystallizing in her heart. The stock prices and profit projections that had once seemed so important now felt hollow compared to the real value she'd witnessed tonight. She looked around the worn but loving space, knowing that for the first time in her career, she was fighting for something that truly mattered. Victoria sat behind her mahogany desk, fingers drumming against its polished surface as the board members filed into her office. Their expensive suits and stern expressions made the spacious room feel suddenly cramped. Through the wall-to-wall windows behind her, gray clouds gathered, matching the mood. "Ms. Hale," Board Chairman Richard Maxwell began, his voice clipped. "We've called this emergency meeting to address some concerning developments. He slid several tabloid photos across her desk, snapshots from the talent showcase showing her laughing with Daniel and Lila. Victoria kept her face neutral, though her heart raced. I failed to see the concern. I've been evaluating the community center's impact firsthand. That's not how it appears, Sarah Johnson, another board member, cut in. These photos suggest inappropriate emotional involvement with a man who's technically our legal opponent in the development project. He's not an opponent, Victoria said firmly. He's a dedicated community leader running vital programs. He's a janitor, Maxwell interrupted, who's becoming a PR liability. The media's already spinning stories about the heartless corporation versus the noble single father. He straightened his tie. It's affecting our stock prices. Victoria stood, her chair rolling back. That center serves hundreds of children. They provide educational support, safe spaces, mentorship. With all due respect, Thomas Chen, the youngest board member, leaned forward. We're not a charity. We're a business. The land's value has tripled since purchase. The luxury development project will generate millions in revenue. Money isn't everything, Victoria said quietly, surprising herself with the words. Maxwell's eyebrows shot up. That's not the Victoria Hale who built this company. Since when do you let sentiment cloud your judgment? It's not sentiment, it's responsibility. Victoria spread out papers showing the center's impact statistics. Look at these numbers. College acceptance rates up 40% among participating students. Juvenile crime down 35% in the neighborhood. These are measurable results. Results that don't affect our bottom line, Johnson said coldly. The demolition proceeds as planned. Sign the order. Victoria's hand shook as she pushed the document back. No, we can find another location for the development. This isn't a negotiation. Maxwell's voice hardened. Sign, or the board will vote to remove you as CEO. We already have the majority. Victoria stared at their faces, people she'd worked with for years, who now looked at her like she was a stranger. Perhaps she was. The Victoria they knew would have signed without hesitation. Take the vote, she said quietly. They did. In less than 5 minutes, her authority was overruled. Maxwell signed the demolition order himself, his pen scratching like a knife across paper. You're making a mistake, Victoria said as they stood to leave. No, Victoria. Maxwell paused at the door. You made the mistake of forgetting what business is about. Don't let these people make you soft. After they left, Victoria sank into her chair, staring at the framed awards on her wall, achievements that suddenly felt hollow. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lila. Thank you for the new art supplies. Attached was a drawing of Victoria holding hands with her and Daniel. Across town at the community center, Daniel was helping a group of kids with their science homework when he heard the mail slot clank. The official envelope on the floor made his stomach sink. He already knew what it contained. Opening it with trembling fingers, he read the words he dreaded. Final notice of eviction. Property to be vacated within 30 days. The children gathered around him, their young faces confused and worried. Mr. Carter? Tommy, a 7th grader, peered at the paper. What's wrong? Daniel swallowed hard. I need to put this up. He walked to the bulletin board, each step heavy. The notice seemed to mock him as he pinned it up, stark black letters announcing the end of their safe haven. They're really going to tear it down? Maria, a 6th grader, whispered. Tears welled in her eyes. But where will we go after school? Who's going to help us with homework? Other children started crying too. Some hugged each other, while others just stared at the notice in shocked silence. Daniel wished he could shield them from this pain like he'd shielded them from so many others. Lila appeared at his side, her small hand slipping into his. Daddy? Her voice quivered. Does this mean we don't matter? The question hit him like a physical blow. Daniel looked at his daughter, at all these children who'd found belonging within these old walls, and for the first time in his life, he had no words of comfort to offer. How could he explain that sometimes the world valued profit more than people? That sometimes their best wasn't enough against the power of money? He squeezed Lila's hand, his silence saying more than words ever could. The evening sky darkened over the community center as Daniel stood in the hallway, staring at the eviction notice. His hands trembled as he read the official letterhead, Hale Industries. The same company whose CEO had shared meals with his daughter, had listened to children's stories, had promised to help. Heavy footsteps echoed through the empty corridor. Victoria appeared, still in her business suit, her face pale and strained. "Daniel, please let me explain." "Explain what?" His voice was quiet but sharp. "How you used us. Made us think you cared while your company planned to destroy everything these kids have?" Victoria took a step forward. "That's not what happened. The board overruled me. I tried to stop it." "Stop." Daniel held up his hand. "I've heard enough corporate excuses. Do you know what these children have been through? What they've lost? And now, you've given them hope just to snatch it away." "I fought for you," Victoria insisted, her composure cracking. "I risked everything." "You risked nothing." Daniel's voice rose. "You'll go back to your penthouse office while these kids lose the only safe place they have. Was it worth it? Did you get enough heartwarming photos for your PR campaign?" Victoria flinched as if he'd struck her. "That's not fair. I care about these children, about Lila." "Don't." Daniel's eyes flashed. "Don't you dare say her name. My daughter trusted you," she thought. He broke off, running a hand over his face. "She thought you were different." A small gasp made them both turn. Lila stood in the doorway of the reading room, her backpack clutched to her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Lila, honey." Victoria stepped toward her, but the girl backed away. "You said you'd help us," Lila whispered. "You played games with us and listened to my songs and—" Her voice cracked. "Why did you make us believe you cared?" Victoria's throat tightened. "Lila, I do care. More than you know," but Lila had already turned and run down the hall, her footsteps echoing against the worn linoleum. Daniel moved to follow his daughter, then paused. "The worst part?" he said quietly. "I actually believed in you too." He left Victoria standing alone in the hallway, surrounded by children's artwork and dreams she couldn't protect. The next morning, Victoria sat in the Hale Industries boardroom. Morning light streamed through the windows, catching on the crystal water glasses and reflecting off the polished table. The board members waited expectantly as she stood. "I've called this meeting," she began, her voice steady, "to announce my resignation as CEO, effective immediately." Murmurs rippled through the room. Chairman Maxwell leaned forward. "Victoria, don't be hasty. We can manage this PR situation." "This isn't about PR." Victoria placed her resignation letter on the table. "This is about choosing between profit and people. For too long, I chose wrong." "You're throwing away everything you've built," Sarah Johnson warned. 20 years of work." "No," Victoria smiled sadly. "I'm finally building something that matters." She removed her company ID and placed it beside the letter. "If I can't save the company, I'll save the children another way." Without another word, she walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the power and prestige she'd spent her life pursuing. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she headed toward the elevator, her steps lighter with each stride. For the first time in her career, she was walking away with nothing but her dignity. And somehow, it felt like everything. The security guard nodded respectfully as she passed through the lobby. Outside, rain began to fall, but Victoria didn't reach for her umbrella. She let the drops fall on her face, washing away the tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in the boardroom. A text message lit up her phone, another plea from the board to reconsider. She turned off the device and slipped it into her purse. They didn't understand that she wasn't losing everything. She was finally finding herself. Rain tapped against the community center's windows as Daniel Carter stood in the main room, surrounded by stacks of cardboard boxes. The space that had once buzzed with children's laughter now echoed with the sound of packing tape being stretched across boxes and quiet sniffles from the corner where kids huddled together. "Careful with those books," Daniel said softly to Mrs. Martinez, one of the regular volunteers. She nodded, wrapping old textbooks in newspaper before placing them in a box labeled Reading Corner. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she worked steadily. In the art corner, Tommy, a freckled 8-year-old, clutched his favorite paint set. "Mr. Carter, Where will we go to paint now? Daniel knelt beside him, ignoring the sharp pain in his still healing shoulder. We'll find a new place, buddy. Maybe the library will let us use their community room. But Tommy's bottom lip trembled. It won't be the same. No, Daniel admitted. It won't be. He squeezed the boy's shoulder, wishing he could offer more than empty promises. Across the room, Maria and her sister Jessica sorted through a pile of half-finished science projects. Their mother worked 2 jobs, and the center had been their after-school haven for 3 years. Now Jessica held up a model solar system they'd built together, the planets dangling precariously from bent wire hangers. Should we just throw it away? She asked, her voice small. No, Daniel said firmly. Pack it carefully. We'll find somewhere to display it again. More volunteers arrived. Parents, former students, neighbors. They moved through the rooms like quiet ghosts, dismantling years of memories piece by piece. Mr. Packen Johnson from the hardware store brought more boxes. Mrs. Chen from the Chinese restaurant down the street brought hot tea and dumplings for everyone, though few felt like eating. In the computer room, Daniel unplugged the ancient monitors, one by one. These computers, despite being outdated, had helped dozens of kids complete their homework, write essays, learn basic coding. He remembered Victoria's face when she'd first seen them, her surprise that they still ran at all. The memory stung now, sharp and bitter. "Daddy?" Lila's voice came from the doorway. She stood there in her favorite purple sweater, looking smaller than her 10 years. "Yes, sweetheart? Can I help pack?" Daniel nodded, but his heart clenched at how subdued she was. No skipping, no humming, none of her usual brightness. She moved to a shelf and began carefully wrapping educational games in bubble wrap. "I kept the drawings," she said after a while. "The ones Miss Victoria helped us make last week." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "That's fine, honey." She said they were beautiful. Lila's voice cracked. "She said we were all artists." A crash from the main room interrupted them. Daniel rushed out to find a toppled box of art supplies, colored pencils scattered across the floor like pickup sticks. Little Amy stood beside it, crying. "I didn't mean to," she wailed. "I just wanted to draw one more picture." Daniel gathered her into his arms, and soon other children crowded around, seeking comfort. He held them as best he could, these kids who'd become like family. Some were immigrants still learning English, others from single-parent homes or families struggling to make ends meet. The center had been their sanctuary. Mr. Carter? It was Marcus, a 12-year-old who'd improved 3 grade levels in reading since joining the program. Will rich people really live here instead of us? Daniel struggled to keep his voice steady. "That's what they're planning. But where will we go after school?" another child asked. "Who'll help us with homework?" "We'll figure something out," Daniel promised, though the words felt hollow. "We always do." As the afternoon wore on, the rooms grew emptier. Every box packed felt like sealing away a piece of hope. The walls, stripped of children's artwork and educational posters, seemed to close in around them. Lila sat in the reading nook, her favorite spot, running her hand over the worn cushions. Daniel approached quietly, sitting beside her. "Is love always taken away?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. The question hit him like a physical blow. He thought of his late wife, of this center that had become their second home, of Victoria's seeming friendship that had dissolved into betrayal. "No, baby," he managed, pulling her close. "Love changes sometimes, but real love stays in our hearts. Always." She buried her face in his shirt. "Like Mama?" "Like Mama," he agreed, his voice rough. "And nothing can take away how much I love you." Across town, in a sleek high-rise office, Victoria Hale sat across from her personal lawyer, Maurice Henderson. Spread across the polished desk were stacks of documents, stock certificates, financial statements, legal forms. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Maurice asked, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Liquidating your entire portfolio is a drastic step." Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the desk. "I've never been more certain of anything. The board will fight this," he warned. "They'll claim you're acting against shareholder interests." "Let them." Victoria's voice was steel. "I've already resigned. My shares are mine to sell." Maurice shuffled through more papers. And this foundation you want to establish? You understand it will take most of your personal wealth? I understand exactly what I'm doing, Maurice. She signed another document with swift, decisive strokes. For once in my life, I'm doing what matters instead of what profits. The lawyer studied her face. This is about that community center, isn't it? The one in the papers? Victoria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the window, looking out at the city sprawled below. Somewhere out there, Daniel and those children were packing up their dreams in cardboard boxes. It's about more than that, she finally said. It's about choosing what kind of person I want to be. The late afternoon sun filtered through the community center's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Daniel Carter stood at the front of the main room, his injured shoulder still aching beneath his plain work shirt. Around him, cardboard boxes lined the walls like silent sentinels marking the end of an era. Children sat cross-legged on the floor before him, their usual energy subdued. Some wiped tears from their cheeks while others stared at their shoes. Lila sat in the front row, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap, looking up at her father with red-rimmed eyes. "Before we say goodbye to our beloved center," Daniel began, his deep voice gentle but strained, "let's join hands for one last prayer together." The children shuffled closer, forming a circle. Even the teenagers who usually hung back joined in, their fingers linking with the younger ones. Mrs. Martinez, the retired teacher who'd volunteered for years, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Mr. Pounds. Wong from the corner grocery store stood in the doorway, his usual cheerful expression replaced by a solemn frown. Parents who'd come to help with the final packing gathered around the circle's edges. "Dear Lord," Daniel started, closing his eyes, "we thank you for the years of blessing you've given us in this place, for every child who learned to read here, for every friendship formed, for every dream that took root." The rumble of engines outside cut through his prayer. Several large trucks pulled up to the curb, their diesel motors idling. Children's heads turned toward the windows, curiosity briefly overtaking their sadness. The main door swung open with a familiar creak. Victoria Hale stood in the entrance, but not in her usual corporate attire. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Behind her, a team of people in business suits filed in, carrying folders and tablets. "I'm sorry to interrupt the prayer," Victoria said, her voice carrying across the quiet room, "but I thought you might want to hear this first." She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the floor. The sound echoed off the walls as everyone watched in stunned silence. "My name is Victoria Hale, and as of 9 o'clock this morning, this property belongs to the Hope Renewal Foundation." She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. "My foundation." Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Daniel straightened, his good hand instinctively reaching for Lila's shoulder. "Those trucks outside?" Victoria continued, gesturing toward the windows. "They're carrying new computers, furniture, educational supplies, and everything else we'll need to not just save this center, but transform it into something even more remarkable." The children's eyes widened. Some craned their necks to peek outside at the trucks. Tommy, the young artist who'd been crying all morning over leaving his beloved art corner, grabbed his best friend's arm in excitement. "I've purchased this entire block," Victoria explained, her voice growing warmer. "We're going to renovate, expand, and create a proper community learning center, with classrooms, a computer lab, art studio, and even a small performance space for those wonderful talent shows." Mrs. Martinez gasped, pressing her hand to her heart. Parents exchanged shocked looks, hope dawning on their faces. "But, most importantly," Victoria said, walking toward Daniel, "this center will continue to be a home for every child who needs one, a place where dreams are nurtured, not demolished." She stopped in front of him, her eyes soft with emotion. "If you'll accept the position, Mr. Carter, I'd like you to be the center's full-time director." Daniel stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. Lila tugged at his sleeve, her face glowing with joy. "Daddy, did you hear that? We get to stay?" The reality of Victoria's words seemed to hit everyone at once. The silence shattered as children leaped to their feet, shouting and cheering. They rushed toward Victoria in a wave of excitement, surrounding her with outstretched arms. "Group hug!" someone yelled, and suddenly Victoria found herself engulfed in small arms. Children pressed against her from all sides, their tears now ones of joy. Tommy wrapped his arms around her waist, nearly knocking her off balance. "Thank you, Miss Victoria, thank you!" More kids piled in, creating a tight circle of happiness around her. "We can keep our reading club. Will we get new art supplies? Can I still practice piano here?" Their voices tumbled over each other in excitement. Victoria laughed, a sound of pure delight that seemed to surprise even her. She hugged back as many children as she could reach, her eyes glistening with tears. Daniel watched the scene unfold, still rooted to his spot. When Victoria managed to look up and meet his gaze through the crowd of celebrating children, he found his voice at last. "You gave up everything for us?" he whispered, his words barely audible above the joyful chaos. Victoria's smile deepened, touching her eyes in a way he'd never seen before. Before she could respond, Lila broke free from the group and threw herself into Victoria's arms. "I knew you really cared," Lila said fiercely, hugging Victoria's neck. "I knew it in my heart." Parents began crying and hugging each other. Mrs. Martinez was openly weeping with joy, clutching Mr. Wong's hand. The legal team stood by the door, grinning at the scene before them, their formal demeanor softened by the children's uninhibited celebration. The room that had been filled with boxes and grief just moments ago now burst with life and hope. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air, making them sparkle like tiny stars falling on the celebrating crowd. Through it all, Victoria held Lila close, while children continued to press against her sides, their faces shining with pure happiness. The CEO, who had once been known for her icy demeanor, now stood transformed, surrounded by love and trust she had earned, not through corporate power, but through the simple act of choosing people over profits. The community center buzzed with new life, as volunteers swarmed through its halls like busy bees. The sharp scent of fresh paint mingled with sawdust in the air. Victoria Hale, dressed in old jeans and a faded t-shirt instead of her usual designer suits, carefully rolled bright yellow paint onto what would become the new computer lab's walls. Daniel worked nearby, his injured shoulder now properly healed, assembling desks with Mr. Wong and several parents. The sound of electric drills and hammering echoed through the building, punctuated by children's excited chatter as they watched their beloved center transform. "Miss Victoria," called 8-year-old Marcus, tugging at her paint-splattered sleeve. "Can I help?" His eager face looked up at her, gap-toothed smile impossible to resist. "Here you go, buddy." She handed him a small roller, showing him how to dip it in the paint tray. "Nice and easy, up and down." Together they worked on the lower section of wall, Marcus's tongue sticking out in concentration. Across the room, Lila organized art supplies with Mrs. Martinez, carefully arranging markers and construction paper in new plastic bins. She kept glancing over at her father and Victoria, a small smile playing on her lips. "The computers are here," called out Mr. Peterson, the local hardware store owner, as he directed delivery workers carrying sleek monitors and towers. Brand new, top-of-the-line systems. Victoria wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of yellow paint. Perfect timing. The networking team will be here this afternoon to set up the high-speed internet. Outside, the playground was taking shape. Local contractors had volunteered their weekend to install bright blue and red equipment, swings, slides, and climbing frames, where there had only been cracked concrete before. The sound of welding and the clang of metal floated through the open windows. Daniel paused his work to watch a group of children press their faces against the window, pointing excitedly at the playground's progress. His eyes met Victoria's across the room, and they shared a moment of quiet understanding. "Never thought I'd see the day, Mrs." Martinez said, walking up to Daniel with a box of books. "Look at all this," she gestured around the room. "And to think they were going to tear it down." The renovation continued through the afternoon. Parents brought homemade sandwiches and lemonade for the workers. Children darted between ladders and paint cans, eager to help wherever they could. The center, which had been their sanctuary even in its worn-down state, was becoming something beyond their wildest dreams. Later that week, Victoria stood before a small gathering of local business owners and potential donors in the newly finished main hall. Photographs of the children lined the freshly painted walls, alongside inspiring quotes about education and hope. "The Carter Center for Hope and Learning," she announced, unveiling the new sign, "needs a director who understands its heart and soul." She turned to Daniel, who stood quietly at the back of the room. "Someone who has already proven his dedication to these children, this community, and the power of second chances." Daniel stepped forward, his usual confidence wavering slightly as all eyes turned to him. "I'm just a janitor who likes helping kids with their homework," he said softly. "You're so much more than that," Victoria replied. "You're the reason this place exists, the reason these children believe in themselves." She held out an official letter of appointment. "Will you accept the position of director?" The room held its breath. Daniel looked at Lila, who nodded encouragingly, then at the faces of the children he'd tutored for so many years. Finally, he reached out and took the letter. The room erupted in applause. 2 weeks later, on opening day, the center gleamed with possibility. New books filled the library shelves. The computer lab hummed with activity. The playground echoed with laughter. Local news crews captured it all, but their cameras couldn't quite capture the spirit of joy that filled every corner. Daniel stood at the podium, looking out at the gathered crowd. Community members filled every chair, with children sitting cross-legged in the aisles. His voice, steady and warm, carried through the new sound system as he thanked everyone who had helped make this dream a reality. Victoria sat in the front row beside Lila. She wore a simple dress instead of her former power suits, looking more at peace than she had in years. As Daniel finished his speech, Lila leaned over and tugged Victoria's sleeve. "Miss Victoria?" she whispered, her dark eyes serious and wise beyond her years. "Daddy always protected me. Now, you protect us too." Sunshine streamed through the newly installed windows of the Carter Center for Hope and Learning, casting warm rectangles of light across the polished wooden floors. The renovated auditorium was packed with familiar faces from the community: parents, teachers, volunteers, and most importantly, the children, who had made this place their second home. Rows of chairs creaked as people settled in, their excited whispers filling the space. Gone were the broken seats and peeling paint. In their place stood comfortable chairs, fresh walls adorned with children's artwork, and a proper stage with real curtains instead of the old bedsheets they used to hang. Daniel Carter stood at the side of the stage, adjusting his tie nervously. He wasn't used to wearing one, but today was special. His daughter Lila sat in the front row, wearing her Sunday best, a yellow dress that matched the cheerful walls of their renewed center. "Ready?" Victoria appeared beside him, looking different from the corporate CEO she once was. Her face had softened over these past weeks, her smile genuine and warm. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. Daniel nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I never thought I'd see this day." The ceremony began with the children's choir, the same group that had performed at the talent show that changed everything. But now, they stood on proper risers, their voices stronger and more confident as they sang "Amazing Grace." When Daniel stepped up to the podium, the microphone actually worked. He looked out at the sea of faces, the immigrant mothers who brought homemade dishes to share, the single fathers who found support here, the elderly volunteers who gave their time to teach crafts and tell stories. "Let us pray," he began, his deep voice steady despite his racing heart. "Dear Lord, we gather today with grateful hearts. You taught us that faith can move mountains, but you also showed us that sometimes angels come in unexpected forms." His eyes met Victoria's briefly. "Thank you for second chances. Thank you for turning our pain into purpose. Thank you for showing us that when we stand together, no challenge is too great." The crowd murmured, "Amen," and more than a few people wiped their eyes. Victoria rose next, approaching the podium with none of her old corporate swagger. Instead, she moved with quiet purpose, pausing to squeeze Lila's shoulder as she passed. "A few months ago," she began, "I thought I knew what success looked like. I measured it in profit margins and stock prices." She paused, looking around the room. Then I met a man who showed me what true wealth is. I watched him give everything he had, his time, his energy, his love, to children who weren't his own. I saw him turn an old building into a sanctuary of hope with nothing but determination and faith. She gripped the edges of the podium, her knuckles white. Daniel Carter taught me that real leadership isn't about power, it's about service. It's about seeing the potential in others and helping them reach it. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. In the audience, Daniel ducked his head, humble as always. Lila beamed up at him, proud tears shining in her eyes. This center, Victoria continued, isn't just a building. It's proof that miracles still happen, that hearts can change, that love can transform us all. Her voice cracked slightly. I came to this town thinking I would build luxury condos. Instead, I found a family. The children from the center, sitting together in their Sunday clothes, nodded enthusiastically. These were the kids who had first broken through Victoria's walls with their unfiltered affection and trust. So today, we're not just opening a building, we're celebrating a new beginning. The Carter Center for Hope and Learning will stand as a testament to what happens when we choose love over profit, community over competition, and faith over fear. A spontaneous applause broke out, echoing through the hall. Daniel made his way to the stage, and Lila rushed to join them. Victoria reached for their hands, forming a chain that represented everything this place stood for: unity, healing, and unconditional love. Someone started humming, "How Great Thou Art," and soon the entire room joined in. The hymn swelled, lifting to the rafters of the renewed building. Parents held their children close. Teachers embraced their students. Volunteers linked arms with the families they'd grown to love. Daniel's deep baritone carried the melody while Victoria, still learning the words, followed along softly. Lila's clear, sweet voice rose above them both, reminiscent of her mother's. Tears flowed freely now. Not tears of sadness or loss, but of joy and gratitude. They were tears that spoke of battles won, bridges built, and hearts healed. They were tears that washed away the past and welcomed the future. The three of them stood together: the humble janitor who became a hero, the corporate CEO who found her heart, and the little girl who helped bring them together. Their joined hands told a story of redemption, of second chances, and of love's power to transform lives. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to glow brighter as hundreds of voices joined in harmony, filling the space with hope and possibility. This was more than a grand reopening. It was a homecoming. Victoria sat at Daniel's worn kitchen table, her designer blazer draped over a mismatched chair. The small apartment filled with the aroma of Daniel's homemade spaghetti and the sound of Lila's infectious giggles. Through the window, the lights of the Carter Center for Hope and Learning glowed warmly in the evening dusk. And then, Lila continued her story between bites of garlic bread. Jenny said she wants to be a computer programmer just like the ones who come teach us coding now. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. She never even thought about that before. Victoria smiled, twirling pasta on her fork. The simple meal tasted better than any five-star restaurant she'd frequented as CEO. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Maybe she'll help design our next computer lab. Daniel watched them from his spot at the stove, stirring a pot of sauce. His shoulder had healed well, though he still moved it carefully sometimes. The sight of Victoria and Lila chatting so naturally made his chest tight with emotion. Who would have thought that the frightening night of the accident would lead to this? "Dad, can Miss Victoria help me practice my science presentation tomorrow?" Lila asked, already clearing her plate. "She explains the solar system way better than my textbook." "If Miss Victoria isn't too busy," Daniel said, bringing the sauce to the table. Victoria reached over to squeeze Lila's hand. "I'm never too busy for you anymore, remember? That's the best part about not being CEO. I actually have time for what matters." The words hung in the air, honest and weighty. Daniel remembered how Victoria had looked in her corner office the day she resigned, surrounded by awards and accolades that suddenly meant nothing. Now she wore less expensive clothes and drove a modest car, but the shadows under her eyes had disappeared. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely. "Speaking of the center," Victoria said, helping herself to more spaghetti, "the new art program starts next week. We already have 30 kids signed up. 30? Daniel's eyebrows rose. That's amazing. Well, when you hire actual art teachers, instead of just handing out crayons, Victoria grinned. Though your crayon classes were pretty spectacular, Mr. Carter. Dad's good at everything, Lila declared loyally, then added, except dancing. They all laughed, and Daniel pretended to look wounded. I'll have you know, I can do a mean electric slide. Please don't demonstrate, Victoria teased, her eyes twinkling. We just ate. The easy banter continued as they finished dinner. Lila insisted on helping with dishes, standing on her step stool between them at the sink. Victoria washed, Lila dried, and Daniel put everything away. Their hands brushed occasionally, comfortable in their shared routine. Later, after Lila had finished her homework and changed into pajamas, she brought out her latest drawing to show Victoria. It depicted 3 figures, holding hands in front of a building with "Hope" written across the top in wobbly letters. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Victoria said softly, studying the careful crayon strokes. Is that the center? Lila nodded. And that's us. She pointed to each stick figure in turn. See? Dad's the tallest, and you're wearing your blue dress, and I'm in the middle. Daniel felt his throat tighten as he watched Victoria trace the drawing with gentle fingers. The woman who had once intimidated boardrooms now sat cross-legged on his shabby carpet, completely at ease. Can I hang it in my office at the center? Victoria asked. Really? Lila beamed. Next to the fancy painting? Right next to it. This is much more important than any fancy painting. After Lila went to bed, Daniel and Victoria stood at the apartment window, looking out at the center. The building's warm lights spilled onto the sidewalk where just months ago they had first collided. New saplings lined the walkway, promising shade for future summers. I got another job offer today, Victoria said quietly. CEO position at a tech firm in California, triple the salary I made at Hale Industries. Daniel's heart stuttered, but before he could speak, she continued. I turned it down immediately. She turned to face him. This is where I belong now, with the kids, with the center. Her voice softened. With you and Lila. Relief flooded through him. We'd miss you if you left, he admitted. The children especially. Just the children? Her smile was gentle, knowing. Daniel met her gaze. No, not just the children. Victoria stepped closer, her expression thoughtful. You know, that day, I thought you jumped in front of my car to stop me. But you were showing me what true love looks like. The words hung between them, full of meaning. Daniel reached for her hand, and their fingers intertwined naturally. Together, they looked out at the glowing lights of the renewed center, a symbol of second chances. The sight of their shared accomplishment filled them both with quiet joy. The renovated building representing not just a physical transformation, but a profound change in their lives. What had started as a near tragedy had blossomed into something beautiful and unexpected. The center's lights continued to shine steadily in the growing darkness, a beacon of hope for the community, just as it had become for them. Through the window, they could see children's artwork decorating the windows, bright splashes of color against the night. Each piece represented a dream fostered, a child supported, a future brightened. In comfortable silence, they stood together, their joined hands a bridge between their once separate worlds. The modest apartment, the thriving center, the peaceful evening. It was all so different from the lives they'd led before, yet somehow exactly right. The moment stretched, warm and meaningful, as they contemplated how far they'd come from that rainy night of the accident. The center's lights glowed steadily, a testament to the power of love, sacrifice, and second chances. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.